Hi, and thanks for coming in. Generating electricity in the van was without question the most intimidating part of the build for me. Scared the snot out of me. I was sure I was going to blow my van up. Turned out to be one of the easiest parts of the build there was. And I'd like to have a conversation with you about that because I wish someone had had a conversation with me about that before I started. It would have saved me a lot of heartache. So hit pause and get yourself an adult beverage and then come back and we'll get started. There's going to be mostly me talking. I'm going to keep the background as interesting as I can. And believe it, there's a couple of surprises coming up in the background ahead of us. And I want to share with you 2 or 3 parts of this that I think were absolutely critical and that you really need to be aware of. But let's get started. Very quickly, let's talk about where you can buy the equipment to generate your electricity. And the truth is, you can buy it all kinds of places. You can buy it from RV dealers, sporting goods stores. You can go to Amazon. You can go directly to the manufacturer or one of the manufacturer's resellers. There's all kinds of options out there. And I want to say right up front that first, I have absolutely no affiliation with anyone. There's no links. There's no income for Dave. I'm not endorsing anything. I don't get paid anything by anybody to say what I say. All I'm doing is sharing my experience, trying to help you make your journey a little bit easier. Having said that, I thought, because I know so little about this and I find it so intimidating, it'd be to my advantage to buy equipment that was all designed to work together. Right out of the box, I knew it was designed to talk to each other. So my solar panels, my charge controller, my MPPT controller, my DC to DC charger, and my battery were all manufactured by the same company. And I bought Renorgy products. They had a good review. They seem to be well received in the industry. You can do whatever you want, but if it's possible to make life easier for you, because my system worked, I just plugged it all in and it worked great. Something to think about. One of the most obvious ways to generate electricity while you're on the road in your van is using solar panels. I mean, what the heck, you're on the road under the sun's free. Why wouldn't you try and capture the energy the sun's producing and convert it to electricity? And that's what these panels do, and they do it so well. I'm shocked. I'm in my garage on a cloudy day, and right now these panels are capturing energy from the sun and converting it to electricity for my van. It blew me away how efficient the panels can be. There's a couple of things to think about. You've got to get them up here and attached somehow. I designed and built my roof rack. There's a video about that. Some people will fasten them directly to the roof of the van. You have to figure out what you want to do that way. Do some research. Connecting them couldn't be easier. There's black wires and there's red wires. I mean, my gosh, it couldn't be simpler to do. There's a video about that as well. Now, there are several things to think about when you think about the solar panels. One is, how many are you going to have or how many are you going to need? I started off my system with 3 100-watt panels. I've got room for a 4th if I wanted to, and there's enough width if I wanted to. I could probably end up with 500 watts on the roof if I chose to, if I thought I needed it. I started off with 3 100-watt panels. That's 300 watts. And so far, so good. But there's a couple of things to think about the panels as you go. The solar panels on the roof capture the energy from the sun, convert it to electricity, and send it through the combiner box down to the compartment where your electrical panel is going to be. Now, this is the black and the red wire coming off of the roof. One thing that I wanted to do in my total electrical design was be able to isolate each part of the system from the rest. So if I had any troubleshooting I wanted to do, or if I just wanted to use the solar panels and not the DC to DC charging, or if I wanted to use the DC to DC charging and not the solar panels, I'd be able to do that just with a flick of a switch. And this is the disconnect switch for the solar energy. When it's open, the power comes off the roof and goes through this. And when it's closed, the power just stays here. It doesn't go any further. I would suggest that's something I think is well worth doing. Now, this is the charge controller. The power coming off the roof from the solar panels isn't always the same. Today is a cloudy day. Look at it. There's no blue sky up there at all. It's all clouds. And on a cloudy day, even though the panels are generating electricity, they're not generating a lot of current. On a sunny day, they could be generating up to between 5 and 8 amps a panel. Three panels, that's 24 amps I could be getting off the roof maximum on an ideal day. A day like today, I might be getting off like 2 or 3. that energy can't go directly into the battery because the battery has a charge profile. That's in the battery video. So first thing it has to do is go through a charge controller. The charge controller, through some kind of magic and technology, takes the power coming off the roof at no matter what voltage it is or what amperage it is, converts it to a charge profile that's safe for the batteries to store it, to receive it in, and it sends it off that way. So you have to have a charge controller. That's an absolute must. Solar panels through a charge controller and into the battery. Now, some panels will have the charge controller built right into the panel when you buy it. Some you buy separately. This is a piece of equipment that you really have to have. You can't get away without it. You must have a charge controller, no question about it. Another way to generate electricity for the back batteries is by using some of the energy that's being created at the front of the van. You see, all our vans have motors in them, and I'm not a mechanic, so I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. Your motor has something called an alternator, and when the engine's running, that alternator generates electricity, and it stores that electricity in the battery that's in the front of the van. And that way you have power. When the engine's not running, you have power for your lights and your radio and your windows, and you also have enough energy in the battery to start the motor when it's not going. Something has to turn it over. When you turn the key, energy from the battery goes into the starter motor and turns it on, and that's what gets the motor to run. Now, it's possible, they call it DC to DC charging, it's possible that when the engine is running and the alternator has replenished the battery that's in the front of the van, and the engine's still running, it's still generating electricity, it's possible to take that extra electricity and run it to the back of the van and put it in the batteries back there. It's absolutely possible. And that was really scary for me, because I thought, you know what, if I do this wrong, not only am I going to mess up the back of the van, I'm possibly going to cook the motor too, you know. That's just crazy. I'm not really comfortable doing that. But it turned out to be a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. What you have to do is connect a cable to either the alternator in the engine compartment of the van itself, which is, I mean, that's way beyond me. I wouldn't even think of doing that. I don't even know what an alternator looks like. But it's also possible to connect a cable to the battery that's at the front of the van and just run off the red terminal there and run it back to the back of the van. I mean, it couldn't be easier, to be honest with you. And then it has to run through what's called a charge controller. You need a DC to DC charge controller, because if you watch the battery, the video on batteries, every battery type that you have, doesn't matter which one you pick, it's going to have a certain charge profile. You have to make sure the energy that you're putting into that battery is the right configuration to make sure it charges properly and that your battery lives as long as it can possibly live and stays healthy. So the battery in the front may not be the same as the battery in the back. So you take the energy from the battery in the front, run it through a charge controller. That charge controller has been programmed to match the charge profile for the battery you're storing in, and that's great. Now there's a number of different ways that you can buy that charge controller. There's all kinds of places, all kinds of models. You need to do a little research on depending on the size of the alternator that you have, and depending on the size of battery bank that you have. You need to be a little bit careful about that if you want to buy a whole bunch of components and just put them all together. It's possible to get a setup off the shelf that's going to work perfectly for you, which again is, because I don't know anything about it, I kept it simple. I bought one that ran right out of the gate. It's perfect. It's fine. And it's really fascinating the way it works, because the Renorgy DC to DC charge controller that I purchased, you plug it all in, and there's a little computer in that charge controller, and it recognizes when the engine's running. But it won't take power right away. It recognizes when the engine's running, and it also recognizes how much charge is in the battery in the front. And it waits until the battery in the front reads as being fully charged for 15 seconds before it turns on and starts pulling the surplus energy to the back. It's just amazing. So you never have to worry about draining the front battery. It won't do that. The system won't allow that to happen. It pulls the energy from the front to the back. I've used it several times, and it's amazing how fast it works. It's just phenomenal. And the bonus part of this is the DC to DC charger that holy cow, look at this, guys. Hopefully you can see this. While I'm making this video, are you there? While I'm making this video, while I'm making this video, some deer, oh, holy shit. Some deer, good God, some deer are crossing the river to the island. I hope you can see those. I don't know if you can see them or not. Maybe you can hear them. Anyway, pretty cool, eh? Really, I don't even know what I'm talking about now. Okay, so maybe you'll even see them walking across the island. So the DC to DC charger that Renorgy that I bought from Renorgy, it charges my batteries in the back. But also, if I am generating solar power and my batteries in the back are fully charged, it will actually reverse the direction of the electricity and trickle charge the front end of my van. So if my van's sitting still for months, the van battery at the front is constantly being trickle charged. And there's always a draw on that battery because the computer's going to need a little bit of juice. There's always going to be a little bit of juice coming out anyway. But that front battery will always be charged as well. You go to the front of the van and you connect to the red terminal and the battery on the motor. Wherever that battery is, you just go, you connect another cable to the red terminal, and you run that cable back through the van, under the van, in the van, doesn't matter until you get close to where your batteries are going to be. In my particular case, I ran it under the van. It comes out right here. That's the cable that connects directly to my battery. And then that cable goes through a charge controller, this thing right here, where the power is configured to suit the charge profile of the batteries that I have, and then it's sent to the battery. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Dave, this is the same charge controller you pointed to when you were talking about the solar power, and that's correct. Depending how you do it, you need a charge controller for both. It's possible that you would buy a separate charge controller for the solar panels and a separate charge controller for the DC to DC charging off of the van motor. It's possible that you would buy two. Or this one's made to do both. This one works with both. Again, it just made it easier for me. It talks to the solar panels, it talks to the batteries, and it handles both DC to DC and the solar array together. Made it so easy. Now, how big is this cable? I forget, but you don't have to worry about it because in the manual for the charge controller, it tells you how big that cable has to be based on how far away the two batteries are. The distance from the battery in the front to the battery in the back will tell you how big that cable has to be. You just go to a store and buy that size cable. Nothing to it. How do you program this to match the battery profile, the charge profile for the batteries that you decide to buy? It couldn't be easier. In the manual, it will tell you that if you have a lead acid battery, or if you have a lithium battery, or a deep cycle battery, it'll tell you what color this little light bulb needs to be. And all you do is push a button when this cover's off until you get the right color, and then it's programmed to have the right charge profile for the battery type that you have. Here, watch this. This is the charge controller, and the blue battery tells me that the lithium, I'm using lithium batteries, which is absolutely correct. Green tells me the batteries are 100% charged. Great. Red tells me the solar array on the roof is generating electricity today, and it is running it through the charge controller. And this red flashing light tells me that the power because the solar panels are completely charged, the surplus energy that the solar panels are generating is being sent through the charge controller, through this breaker to the front battery, and I'm trickle charging the battery at the front of the van. Now, if I was generating electricity and the motor was running, the surplus energy from the alternator would be coming through this wire, through the charge controller, and topping up the battery. Now that video was done in the summertime when I had the whole system up and working. It's shut down right now for the winter. The other thing I want to point out to you, if you recall when I was talking about the solar, I put in a disconnect so I could isolate the solar panel's energy from the rest of the system. I've done the same thing with the DC to DC, but instead of a disconnect switch, I've put in a breaker. And that breaker switch, if it's open, then nothing's going to happen. The energy from the front battery and the charge controller don't even know each other exist. They don't communicate at all. If it's closed, then the system works and the charge controller talks to the battery at the front and goes through the whole system of whether it's going to pull power back and forth or not. Now, being able to isolate the DC to DC charging system from the rest of it was something I wanted to do because I wanted to be able to troubleshoot each system and make sure they were working okay. But then there was a hidden bonus in this. This is a Dodge ProMaster 3500 extended body. I have the small alternator. When you buy them, when they're built with one size alternator or a bigger one. And this one was built with a smaller one. And it's been suggested online that it may be hard, a lot of work for that alternator to be charging your whole solar system all the time. And I don't want to wear it out. So I thought, well, on a sunny day, I may not need to use the alternator. You know, on a sunny day, my solar panels might replenish all the energy that I've used overnight. That's what I thought, and it turns out that's absolutely true. The average usage I have overnight when we're on the road with a fan running all night long, the cooler running all night long, we use our cabin lights at night, like after dark before we go to bed, we're charging our phones. We're using between about 10 to 12 amp hours before dawn, overnight, about 10 to 12 amp hours. My solar panels on an average sunny day will charge 10 to 12 amp hours back up again in 3 to 4 hours. So on days like that, I don't need a DC to DC at all. Just don't need it. There were a couple of days, we were on the road for 7 weeks. There were 2 times when we were dry, it'd been cloudy. It'd been cloudy for a couple of days. So I'd used my 12 amp hours overnight, 4 or 5 through the day, a little bit of charging, because even on a cloudy day, you get a bit of charging from the solar panels. And then another night, so I was down to like 65% on my batteries, you know, and I had a lot left, but I wasn't used to it and I got scared. So the next day, I closed this breaker. And in closing that breaker, it activated the alternator, the DC to DC charging. And as soon as I fired up the motor and started down the road, it started pulling 25 amps right off the motor. Boom, almost immediately. And that's the thing, you see, this is a 50 amp DC to DC MPPT controller. It takes energy from the roof and energy from the motor. If there's any energy coming from one side or the other, and the other one kicks in, it'll only take 25 from one and 25 from the other. It splits it in half. So, what I'm trying to say is on a cloudy day, I might only be getting 3 or 4 amps or 5 amps from my solar panels, but the alternator will still only pull 25. But if I turn this switch to the off position and eliminate the solar panels, so this charge controller doesn't even know there's solar panels on the roof, it'll pull a full 50 amps off the motor at the front. That'll recharge the batteries in no time at all. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool the way that works. It's you can make this system function the way you want it to. We're using solar 99% of the time, and it does this just fine. Now, there are several other ways to generate electricity in your van. I really don't know that much about them because I didn't do them, but one is to take when you park in someone's driveway and you run an extension cord to their house and it comes into you, run it into your van, you can run that power. It can't go directly into the battery, but it can run through what's called a converter, and that converter will take the 110 power from the house, convert it to 12 volt energy, run it through, again, another charge controller. In this case, you would need another charge controller because the one that I have wouldn't do this. But take the energy from the converter, run it through the charge controller, and then put it in the battery. That's one way of doing it. And another way would be if you had a generator, which I don't get this at all, but some big motorhomes will do this. They'll have a big generator that'll generate power. It'll generate again at 110, and then you run it through a converter, and it converts it to 12 volt. You put it back in the battery. To be honest, if you were going to be parked someplace and never start the motor of your van, or if you were going to be, I guess if you were living someplace or you're in the van someplace where you're going to have a furnace going all the time, you want to do something, you want to bake a cake every day or something, if you're going to use a ton of energy, then maybe those might be options that you might want to look at. We live in our van, and it's almost like we're camping. We spend a lot of our time outside the van. We don't lounge in the van during the day or night. We like to be outdoors, and that's where we are. And our experience has been that the solar panel, 99% of the time, is all we would ever need. And having the DC to DC backup for insurance purposes on those dark or really dark days is more than enough for us. And that's been our experience. The one piece of equipment, though, that I really strongly would recommend that you look at is a battery monitor. It couldn't be easier to install, and the one that I purchased, again, was a Renorgy one because I wanted them all to talk to each other. And this battery monitor will tell you when your battery's charging, the rate it's charging at, and how long it's going to take for your batteries to be completely charged. If your batteries are discharging, it'll tell you how quickly they're discharging. It'll tell you how much time you have at the rate they're discharging before the batteries are completely empty. Knowing that and having that information is really a bonus. It really brought a lot of peace of mind to me, because even on a cloudy day, as we're driving down the highway, I knew my batteries were being recharged, and I didn't have to worry about stopping and hooking up or connecting the DC to DC breaker. I could just drive along, and I was confident that by the time we got to the end of the day and the sun went down, our batteries would be replenished. It's nice to know that. Okay, holy cow, we're almost done. Thanks so much for watching this far. But now there are two things that are absolutely critical for you to know and be aware of before you start connecting your wires. The first is just common sense. You have to be sure that your charge controller is connected to your battery before you put any power through it, before you connect your solar powers to it, or before you connect your alternator to it. You can't have power going into your charge controller unless it has some place to go after the charge controller does something with it. If you don't have some place for it to go, you're going to burn out your charge controller in just a couple of seconds, they say. So that's number one. Be sure you have your batteries connected first to the charge controller before you put a load on. Great. Number two is, and this is really easy to find out, but you have to be aware. It's going to sound pretty technical, but don't get scared now. Just relax. You have to know the voltage and or the amperage that your charge controller needs before you connect your solar panels. Because, and watch the video I have on connecting the solar panels, because if you connect your solar panels in series, or if you connect them in parallel, it will affect the voltage and the amperage that's coming down from the roof. It's very basic electricity. It's very easy to figure out. In my particular case, the Renorgy charge controller that I'm using, I have to have 12-volt power going into that charge controller. That's all it can take. I think that's probably because it's coming off the battery as well. It's doing them both at the same time. So it has to be 12-volt power, which meant I had to connect my solar panels in parallel in order to maintain the 12-volt coming off the roof. It's not hard to do. Your book, the manual, will tell you what you need. And once you know what you need, you simply have to determine how you have to connect your solar panels on the roof. It's not a hard thing. Don't get scared. Take a deep breath. I was so intimidated by that part, but it's not as bad as it seems. Thanks so much for watching this. You can do it.